My husband cheated on me and says it's because he wanted to try polyamory. This is from Ali Cat, so I'm assuming this is a woman. He had a brief relationship with another man, which ended when he told me because I told him I wanted a divorce if it didn't end. He's really interested in polyamory and I'm just not. I have a terrible anxiety disorder and the stress and worry of, what if they choose the other person? What if I'm not good enough? This would eat me alive. I realise you all here are pro-poly and I respect that, but I'm not able to do it. But my husband can't understand why, because he doesn't feel the same anxiety I feel. He's unable to put himself in my monogamy shoes. If anyone here has experience or advice, I'm all ears. Thanks. I'll be honest, I can't quite relate to what it would be like to have your husband decide that he wants to be perforated in such a manner, but it would seem that it would probably wind you up, particularly if you've married this man and I assume you love him. Especially when you'd have thought, well, since this person seems to be a woman, maybe he wouldn't go that direction. You know, like, it's one thing to say, like, my wife and my best friend, but to go, my husband and his best friend? I mean, it doesn't really jive well in that sort of way. I bet it was one hell of a shock. But we've got another one coming. Poof! Gone! By Giddy Gumdrop. How do you deal with a relationship that ends suddenly, traumatically, and unexpectedly? Yesterday, my relationship with one of my partners came crashing down, and I've been doing a poor job of processing how to move forward from this moment. The shortest way I can describe the events is that all was well our last date, on the 7th of the 4th, that's the 4th of July. We've been seeing each other around 7 months, and we spoke on text a few times on 7 of 5, 7 of 6, also nothing out of the ordinary. Yesterday my partner calls me after requesting a scheduling change. Another of his partners was having an emergency. I told him how I felt about the change, asked him what he wanted to do. He agreed to still meet up with me, saying that he understood, and we decided he would come later in order to provide support to my meta. Meta means the partner that transcends the rest of the relationships. He then called me requesting yet another time, and during this call starts telling me about a book he read and how he feels as though I don't, quote, value myself. This all sounds strange. I have anxiety disorder, but I've never questioned my worth as a person or my value to my relationships. Then he starts talking about how relationships need to be effortless work, unquote. I tried to understand what he was saying, but I'm not sure it was totally based in reality. I asked him to come over, and he said that he was bring my belongings that were at his house. When he got to my house, he continued saying more frequently that I don't value myself. I asked for specific examples, and he said, the spell isn't right. I mean, come the fuck on. I asked what the spell was, and he couldn't put words to it. I said, do you mean NRE? And he said no, and he didn't believe that NRE had to ever end. I'm assuming that means non-monogamous relationships. I started talking about what love means and also commitment, as if she has a fucking clue what either of those is. At this point, he continued to talk about things relating to the, quote, spell, and I became very confused. He then said he needed a 2-week break, unquote, and I asked him what he thought would be learned in 2 weeks, and he couldn't tell me. At this point, I'm shocked and confused. I thought we had a healthy relationship, and I did not understand this idea of 2 weeks, and he couldn't say if we were going to work on our relationship or what the problem even was. I said goodbye to him and he left my house. A few hours passed and I became genuinely concerned for his mental health. He has bipolar disorder, because of course he does, and I felt as though the day was striking out of place. He usually is stable and able to communicate his wants, needs and feelings. When I called him, he had difficulty speaking. At one point during the call, he did not remember texts he had sent me the day prior, and then thought he was speaking out loud when he wasn't actually talking. He couldn't tell me if he wanted to continue with the relationship and kept bringing up my self-worth, which I articulated I did not believe was a problem. Again. Towards the end of the call, he said, I think I'm having a manic episode. I asked him if he was going to contact someone for help, and he said yes. I agreed not to speak with him for 2 weeks. Today I have no idea where I stand. My body is treating the experience as a breakup. I don't know if I will ever hear from him again, and it was so painful. I don't know if I want advice or just support. I just feel helpless and totally taken aback. I'm very self-aware, and I truly believe I did not do anything wrong, and that there was no warning. Just feeling empty. So, that's really great, right? You've got two people with diagnosed disorders arguing over self-worth. One thinks that they can reach into the other person's soul and define who they are, and the other one thinks the entire relationship is completely healthy, and yet they're talking of like a meta-relationship and having tons of different relations going on in some sort of Byzantine web. I'm going to give you a hint, guys. This really isn't a good idea. Because I don't know about you, but most men can't handle one woman, let alone 4 or 5. And imagine when you mix in all of their different boyfriends and girlfriends. Imagine if one of them conceives. How are you going to know which one is whose child? Are you going to get a genetics test? What kind of problems will that cause? How will you handle it with the other women? I mean, this should be self-evident, guys. You do not do this. This is ridiculous on all levels. And the fact that anybody does this is just so retardedly impractical that it could only happen in modern Western society. I mean, can you imagine how complex it must get when two of the guys decide to perforate each other? I mean, how are the women going to react? How are the other guys going to react? Is it going to change the tone of all of the relationships? I mean, come on, guys. Like, how do adults do this? This is so evidently retarded. I mean, at least in Muslim societies, and even they weren't perfect, you had like an end point with these sorts of things. Like, you had the 4 wives and the husband. You had like an end point where you could, define them out. And there's still complications, of course, because the women still interact. But when you've just got this clusterfuck of people with metas and shit, like they've got like the monogamy and then they've got the different relationships connecting to each other, like, this is no way to manage a society, and it completely misses the ultimate end of sex, which is children. Like, it's not this, I mean, cummies, guys, like, it's a good part of sex, but the end goal of it is to have children. That's why that feeling is there, because somehow it seems like maybe we may want to reproduce at some point, and we should have some sort of incentive. Like, if we were to just rub palms together, it wouldn't quite have the same pizzazz to it, would it? But I already know that if you've clicked on this, you probably have an inkling that maybe this is wrong. But that's not really the point of the video, because this is just the most extreme expression of it. Like, these idiots will utterly destroy themselves, and they probably already know it. You don't develop neuroses like the ones they have for no reason. But one thing that is very common is cheating. Now, cheating is obviously a really bad idea, but sometimes because we're enslaved to sex and we're enslaved to just following our passions, we end up in it. Now, funnily enough, we actually need to control this, because you got to deal with the geezer afterwards. And you think that you're just going to pay him off to bang his wife? No! Of course fucking not. He loves that girl. Even if she's flawed and she leads you into it. In fact, there's a book called the Book of Proverbs, which goes into a lot of details about this. It tells you, in the first 10 chapters, which are, like about 4 pages, because it's biblical scripture, right? Tells you in 10 chapters to avoid women like this 5 times. 5 times in different chapters. It devotes at least 2 of them to just deliberately expanding this. Avoid this kind of thing. Because you'll have to deal with the husband, and you will have to deal with the consequences of your actions. Like, could you look a man in the face after you've banged his wife? Could most of us, unless we're like fucking, Billy Big Balls, right? Like, we couldn't in good conscience, because you've just destroyed that man's life by fucking his girlfriend or fucking his wife. Or you've at least made it really rough. He doesn't need it, and you don't either. She's just looking for attention, and she will fuck you up if you actually pursue it like a retard. Now, why did I just expound this, considering the title is Why Sexual Degeneracy Kills Societies? Well, it's because we seem to have forgotten a fundamental truth. Aristotle explained it pretty well. He said that the family is the primary building block and atom of the society. We cannot compromise this if we want to have a society, because all the state is, essentially, is a family of families. That's all a state is. That's all a nation is. And if you're continually trying to fuck around with the internals of these sorts of things, well, you fuck up the society. There's one actually very interesting book by a guy called J.D. Unwin, who wrote on this in the 1920s. For those sorts of book nerds like me, go read it. It goes into lots of detail about this. He talks about 96 different civilizations and cultures where this decline fucked them up, and where these sorts of different tiers of relationship influence the success of that society. And if you still can't imagine how this may influence society in a negative way, how having all of these different polyamory, like cheating affairs going on could ruin society, well, frankly, think of it this way. So, imagine that half of the population is raising children without a father. How is that going to influence the next generation of men? Are they going to be stronger or are they going to be weaker? Are they going to be more masculine or more feminine? Are they going to be unbalanced when they leave the home? Well, we already see it. Did we used to have these sorts of mundane mat types? Did we used to have these sorts of nerds who would obsess about video games because they can't find success in the real world, carving out their empire? No, we didn't. We didn't have wage slaves. There were people who worked for each other, but they weren't slaves. The majority of people were in fact self-employed 100 years ago. And now instead we've got these domesticated cattle, weak men who can't grasp the world out in front of them. Also, imagine how much time must be wasted, how many hundreds of thousands of hours must be wasted, and how much energy must be wasted and just squandered for no fucking reason because people are too busy, looking outside of their families. Can you imagine how much energy it must take to sustain 6 boyfriends for a woman? Or even 12 girlfriends for a man? Can you imagine how much energy that must take? It must be ridiculous. Imagine what this could be applied to if we just had some self-control. We could be rebuilding the cathedrals. We could be forming families with children who actually have a fucking idea what the world is, and instead they're defaulting to atheism the moment that they read anything because they're intellectually malformed, because their families are weak. These families wouldn't be so weak if we started to control ourselves and started to tone this shit down. And that's why I'm making this video, because I want to tell my generation, those people around my age, I'm 21 for reference, that we need to pack this shit in if we want to have a civilization for our children. And if you don't want to have children, then at least stay away from those sorts of behaviour so we can actually, solve these problems, because they aren't going to solve themselves. In fact, if anything, if we leave them alone, they will get worse. And the last thing we need is more problems. And you know where that solution starts? It starts with you. And it starts with self-control. This is the one thing that will make you happy. Self-control. Self-control and the pursuing of virtues will make you happy. If you devolve into these sorts of things that are common in our society, you'll be miserable like the rest of the society. I don't think I need to tell you how much more unhappy people are now as they were in, say, 1950. You know why? Because more of this stuff is around, and so we have more reasons to be miserable. Stay safe, guys, and stay away from that kind of thing. I'd like to thank the people on the Renaissance Man programme who you'll see on screen. They've helped me so much over the last couple of months, and hopefully they've received good and satisfactory content from the Renaissance Man programme, which you can find in the description of the video. Thank you very much for watching.